Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, an illuminating chat with Connecticut's own Elise Hart Kipness. Elise's first novel of suspense, Lights Out, introduces sports reporter Kate Green, a former Olympian who finds herself at the epicenter of a murder investigation when her best friend falls under suspicion. The victim is superstar basketball player Kurt Robbins, a well-known ladies' man, and while he and his wife Yvette had an agreement that he could stray as long as he never left their marriage, authorities believe he decided to do just that, and that Yvette stopped him with a gun. Kate, who's on the outs with their station over a high-profile gaffe, must prevent a rush to judgment and salvage her career, even if it means coming face-to-face with her long-estranged father and confronting some very unsavory truths. It's a story that Elise is uniquely qualified to tell. A former print and television journalist, she did on-air reporting for Fox Sports Network and knows the high-adrenaline, high-stakes world of live TV. A graduate of Brown University, Elise now makes her home in Stamford with her family. She is co-president of Sisters in Crime Connecticut and a proud member of Mystery Writers of America and International Thriller Writers. Lights Out is the first in a new series for Amazon's Thomas and Mercer imprint. USA Today bestselling author John Land called the book a seminal triumph in mystery writing, as original as it is polished. A crime thriller of rare depth and societal implications, Lights Out shoots straight and hits the bullseye dead center. Now, join us as Elise Hart Kipness talks about dropping the mic in preference of a pen, or a keyboard as the case may be. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Central Booking. Today, I am in conversation with another Connecticut great, Elise Hart Kipness, whose debut crime novel, Lights Out, will be available by the time you see this video. And it's really excellent that this book is not only your debut novel, but it was just chosen as one of Amazon Prime's first reads. So welcome to the show, Elise, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you, John. I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, it was great to be picked for Amazon First Reads. It was really an honor and a surprise. And I've been during the whole process, I was constantly checking my phone, like, okay, where am I ranked now? Where am I ranked now? What did they say now?
Isn't it crazy? But it's so funny because the book is not officially out as we're talking. It will be by the time people see this interview. But yeah, I mean, it's already like a bestseller. It's got a bazillion reviews, which is really, really awesome because, so many people have gotten a sneak peek at this book. And it's kind of funny because the publication date got moved back from September to November. And there's a bit of Halloween that runs throughout this book. It's subtle,
Yeah.
but I think people are really enjoying that. And then, if you're like me, you'll just love the fact that Halloween lingers a little bit longer because the day after Halloween, which I think is your actual publication date, is like a bummer for people like me who wait and wait and wait and then Halloween's gone. So again, if you want Halloween to last just a little bit longer in a subtle way, this will be the book for you for that reason and many others. I'm talking a lot, so I'm just gonna, briefly set up this book and then I want you to tell me all about it. But Lights Out. So basically, it stars Kate Green, who is a former Olympian. She's a sports reporter going through sort of a very difficult time and doesn't really know if she's going to have a career to return to. And then, on top of all that, her best friend's husband, who is an NBA superstar, is murdered, and his wife, Yvette, who also happens to be Kate's best friend, falls under suspicion. So high drama, a lot of stuff going on. And so Kate gets involved because she thinks that the police are sort of wrongly looking at Yvette and sort of have tunnel focus. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, one, how Yvette being her best friend sort of helps to legitimize Kate as a sleuth. And then, as Kate begins to investigate, how does that change her relationship with Yvette? Because that creates, some stresses that she didn't necessarily expect.
Well, you brought up a great point, which obviously shows why you're like interviewing authors and everything, because you need that that avenue to have your main character, especially if they're not a detective or a police officer, investigate. So because it's someone close, she has a very legitimate reason to. And then one thing you didn't give away, but I don't really mind saying, is Kate has an estranged father who she hasn't really talked to in about 20 years. And he's an NYPD detective and he's assigned to that case. So that creates all kind of tension and conflict. So in some ways, the Yvette-Kate relationship is a means to progress the story in that way. But in another way, it really gave me the opportunity to delve into female friendship and the dynamics between female friendship and her dynamics with her father and that relationship and needing information, but not quite knowing how to deal with that. So it was more than just a device, I would say. It also created its own storylines and kind of interest in it. And then you mentioned how did the relationship between Kate and Yvette progress? And that's something very interesting. And it's interesting to view it, I think, as a reader without giving too much away. And then also as Kate, because Kate has her own arc with the relationship that you have to go through. And yeah, it was fun. It was really fun to create.
You know, it was fun to read. It was a wild ride, to see what happens and the stress on, friendships when these things happen.
Murder, when that murder stuff
Yeah,
happens.
when that murder pops up, like, it's a real bummer, and it can really change a friendship, at least for a while.
It can strain it.
Yeah, just a tad. But it's such a great dynamic. I mean, there are so many great relationships woven in throughout this book, and we will talk about some of them. But you yourself, are a former television sports reporter, which I have to assume can be a very intense job. And I wanted to ask, in this book, personal and professional lives collide, and then there's kind of salacious details that come out in the press, because when you are an NBA superstar, people are looking at you, and your private business becomes public. If you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, the world is probably going to know about it at one point or another. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, how you drew on that to tell the story of Kurt and Yvette, and then in what ways is their story, illustrative of the larger reality that exists within the sports world or the celebrity world in general?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would draw from my whole experience, which I was a sports reporter, and that was kind of the job that was the most fun to me, which is why I went back to it. But before that, I was a news reporter, and I worked at NBC, and I worked on Long Island. And I almost would say more of the negative stuff, I wouldn't say it was a negative experience, but the more stressful or tense stuff almost came from that world. So it's a combination of those things. But you're hyper focused on if you're a celebrity. And I was there, and I'm going to date myself, really at the transformation when news started to go from being a noon newscast, a 5 o'clock, a 6 o'clock, to 24-hour news starting. And 24-hour news, it just kicked everything into such high gear because everything had to be constant. And I think that was so much harder for celebrities and everyone, because you didn't just report the news, but you were reporting the speculation leading up to the news, and then did it match what your speculation was? And that's not just in politics or news stories, but it's in, Inflategate or any one of the sports stories or who's doing what. So there's a tremendous amount of focus, and news does tend to focus on the negative a little bit more, which can be hard. Now, I'm not trying to make anyone who's listening to this feel sorry for Kurt, because he certainly brought a lot on to himself. And you might say he deserved a lot of what he got in terms of the reporting on him. But it's a complicated world there, and I do think it's gone a bit out of control. I think you're hearing more of my editorial thoughts on news than actually how it related to the book. So I'm not sure I quite answered your question.
No, I think you did, but I mean, it's an interesting point because there has been such a cultural, shift, and it is a 24/7 news cycle, like you mentioned. And unfortunately, now there's not a lot of time necessarily, for fact finding. It's about
Right.
getting out the story, as quickly as you can. And of course, we all love that lurid stuff. So the negative has become, in a lot of ways what we're spotlighting. So it's interesting to see how that plays out in a book like this. And I think it has a bit more weight when people know what your background actually is. And it's kind of cool too. I think, being a reporter, you're sort of your own amateur sleuth because you got to go get that story and put the pieces together. So I think that too helps to legitimize your character, knowing that you have done this, you've walked the walk, you've talked the talk. And I did want to ask you, a little bit about sports. This might be an odd question, but obviously, your background is in sports reporting and more general reporting, but you have a character who's a sports reporter and a former Olympian. And the victim in this book is also, sort of a sports figure. Was it difficult for you to balance, how much sports you were going to bring into this book and not lose readers who might not be interested in that aspect? Because it's a really nice balance. Someone like me who's not really into sports, I know you find this hard to believe. I mean, don't look like I'm a sport person, but it was fascinating, but it didn't feel like it overwhelmed the narrative ever. And I'm just wondering what that process was like for you. Was that a conscious thing when you were weaving it in?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it was very, very conscious because I wanted to create a world where sports was a setting and not an X's and O's book. And I wanted it to be about the glamour and the behind the scenes. I mean, look, if you want to read about sports or watch sports, you can turn it on, but I wanted to be the person to take you into those hidden tunnels in Madison Square Garden that really should be of interest to anyone, or should. Yes, you should be interested in my book, but could be of interest to anyone, whether you're a sports person or not, and kind of take you to the people part of it, which is a lot of what I did, because I was more of the I wasn't an X's and O's reporter. I would do a pregame. I would go into the locker rooms afterwards and talk about the win or the loss. And a lot of it was to get to the emotions of it. And I learned so much from that too. But I was very conscious to make the book um, available to everyone. And it was more about kind of in the lines of like Ali Reynolds Shiver and Kathleen West, which isn't a mystery, but Home or Away, where it's there and it's a woman in what you might consider like a man's world, but it's just where she is. Like she could be on a desert island, or she could be in any number of places that you may not be familiar with, but it might be fun to go visit.
Absolutely. So yes, bottom line, if you are a sports fan, it will appeal to you. But if you are not a sports fan, it will also appeal to you. I always appreciate that balance. And I love that you mentioned about Madison Square Garden and the parts of it that we see, because I think that a lot of us who are not in that world have a perception of what Madison Square Garden is. And there are parts of the garden that are not, necessarily what you would expect. So if you're intrigued by that, another reason to check out the book, because there's some cool scenes set there. So you were also mentioning, sort of being a woman in what's still largely a man's world. It's still dominated by men oftentimes. And so, of course, Kate has some experiences with sexism. And I was wondering if you would mind talking about that. Why did you choose to incorporate that in the book? And what do you hope it illustrates, about the double standards that, as much as we've progressed as a society, they are still there. And we see some of that in this book.
Yeah. And again, I would say that this has opened up not particularly to my sports experience, but I would take it in conjunction with my whole experience as a reporter. It was always like little things for me. I feel like I was very lucky that, but for the grace of God, something, because I was there at the time when you hear about the stuff that was happening to colleagues that was much more serious. But and it was interesting. I was having this conversation with someone. At that point, we just felt like we were felt lucky to be in the game. So the little things we just let roll off our backs, kind of, if they weren't too serious. And there were I would say 90% of the people I dealt with in the sports world were great, but there were 10% that were not. I mean, and those experiences stayed with me. And I think Kate, what happens to Kate, and it's very much at the beginning of the book when she sort of loses her temper, was like what I wish I could have done 1,000 times, but I kept my mouth shut. You know, I'm like, and I wish I had. But there was a basketball player who absolutely made it very clear that women shouldn't be in the locker rooms, and just wouldn't talk to us, was very negative. There was a public relations officer at Pinehurst when I covered the US Open there who never met me before. I was the only female there for the most part, only on-air female, and would literally bring the players from like ESPN and CNNSI and all the stations that we were supposed to get the winner and the player, and would just ignore me, to the point where on the fourth day when Payne Stewart won that year, and he had promised over and over, you'll get this interview, and like I could get fired for not getting that interview. Right. And he's walking Payne Stewart, he's like, you're next, you're next, you're next, and then he's walking him down the hallway away from me, and I'm still thinking they're going to come back. My cameraman's like, he's not coming, you need to do something. So I scream, like, I'm blocked from going to the hall. I scream, Payne, can you do this interview? And the guy is pulling him away still. And Payne stops him and says, no, I want to do this interview. So, he saved me. And right. What an amazing person. It's so tragic what happened to him. But he, I got lucky there because he did come back, but the PR guy was, out to get me. And so there were, so as I'm talking, like they're bubbling up. And I think it was like very cathartic to write that part of the book.
Sure. I know, and it's just interesting because when you think of men who are assertive or aggressive, people see that as, hey, you're really good at your job. And then if a woman does that, all of a sudden assertiveness or aggression is a bad thing. So, there's been some shift, but I remember my friend Marsha Clark, like, all the guy lawyers, like people would be, yeah, go get him. And then if she did it, it would be like, what is this? And it's just wild to think like the difference in gender and, people's perception of that. So we've come a long way, but probably not long and far enough. So I have to ask you about Kate as a mom too, because she's a single mom. She's divorced, has an interesting, relationship with her ex-husband, but she's dealing with some really serious issues with one of her kids. I don't know how specific you want to be about that, but I just wanted to ask you, what were you hoping to capture about parenting in the modern age? Because it can be really a complex thing. And as a mother yourself, do you find that, it's cathartic to be able to deal with, concerns or worries, even if just, in a fictional sense, because you have somewhere to channel those emotions?
That was really all fiction. Like when I started writing the book, because it took me so long to write it, my kids were in like nursery school and kindergarten. They're in college now. So I remember, maybe they were in first and second grade, and I remember sitting them down and saying, I'm making the kids teenagers because teenagers are so much more interesting. And, they're going to be a lot older than you in my book, but they're more interesting to be teenagers. And then my kids surpassed the age of the kids in the book, and they're off in college, and I'm still trying to get an agent for the book and get it published and everything. It took like 10 years or so, or even longer. So it's not really my kids at all, because they would have been about like diapers and baby formula and everything like that.
Right. And no, I wouldn't assume that, that the storylines are based on your kids, but it's just interesting. I've interviewed a lot of people who are parents, and, they say that they'll channel things into their fiction just because there's no other way, to deal with it. Or I had one friend who, when her kids were young, she would write every terrible thing that she could think of, into her books. And she would feel like, if I write this down, it won't happen in real life. Of course, she's like middle-aged and has already written like 100 books. So I'm like, she's written through all of a parent's worst fears. But it's interesting to, get that perspective. But it is funny too, when your kids are young and then all of a sudden they're not so young anymore. And the time is a weird concept, because I've realized recently that I have not been, a teenager. I'm so old that, like, I've not been a teenager longer than I was a teenager. It's just bizarre. I'm gonna shut up.
John, actually thinking about what you're saying, because I'm trying to think about the teenage part, because I hadn't been asked that a lot. I think a lot of it goes to my days in news, because I covered drug addicts, and I covered like I did a whole series when I was on Long Island at a teenage drug rehabilitation center, and a very in-depth report where I spent time with them, because I'm not someone who just kind of pulls things from the air. I need to kind of put myself there.
Right.
But I think a lot of those things were more my experience as a reporter, and less the personal stuff.
Sure. And, this won't be a spoiler alert, but just so people understand. So one of Kate's sons, a teenage son, had sort of an accidental overdose that nearly killed him. And so they really have to sort of learn how to trust each other, again, and where are the boundaries, when should I say something? When should I not say something? But I think that's really, relevant to what we see today, because it's happening, all the time. And unfortunately, a lot of people, don't get a second chance, and there's not always happier outcome. So it's interesting to see how factual things work their way into fiction, especially again with someone who has a background like yours. So anyway, so I do want to come back to Liam, Kate's father. As you mentioned, he is sort of on loan to the Greenwich Police Department from the NYPD. And so all of a sudden they have this estrangement, and they're back in each other's lives for better or for worse. And I'm wondering, is Kate sort of reacquaints herself with her father, as separate as they seem to be. She also realizes that there are some parts of him that exist within her. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how she sort of starts to see, aspects of herself that are reflective of him and what he does.
I had so much fun writing Liam. Like, I don't know why. And as he emerged, he just became like, I can visualize him in my brain, and I think about him sometimes. He plays a really big role in book 2 when it comes out, and you kind of uncover more of it. But she finds a lot of things are in common, and some of them are very small. Like, her mom is a vegan, green eating, no real ice cream kind of person. I mean, she loves her mom, but she loves junk food, and Liam loves junk food, and they like to have hamburgers together. And he's very smart. He's very oriented on solving problems and puzzles, which is where Kate sort of gets her investigative chops from. And I think Kate might have even maybe gone down a different route and maybe become an investigator in a different life because of Liam. But her mom and her stepdad, who she adores, pushed her in a very different way. And I think Kate has never felt completely whole about having that hole in her life. WHOL and HOL.
I love wordplay.
And I think she's really searching for a reason other than he didn't love her to explain why he just kind of deserted her and her brother.
Sure. And it's such a fun dynamic to read, because every time you're ready to write Liam off, he does something that then is sort of endearing. And it's interesting too, because Kate sort of has no choice but to trust him in a professional capacity because the detective who's in charge of the case, really, it's tunnel vision. Yvette did it, and he just wants to be on the news and on the front page of the paper. And so if somebody, is really going to take a good hard look at this, she has to trust that it's going to be Liam. So it's interesting. She can't cut him off completely because she needs him, and he sort of ends up needing her too. So it's a great dynamic, and it's excellent to hear that there will be more of that in the second book, which maybe you'll tell us a bit more about. So one more question about this book, and then I'm going to move into more general topics briefly.
Sure.
But I did want to ask you about Greenwich, because it does take place, in Greenwich, Connecticut, which I think that people probably have, some perceptions about, which may or may not be correct. But I wanted to ask you, why did you choose to set this, in a real place versus a fictional one? And then what kind of considerations does that cause, when you're rendering a place and people on the page that people might be considering is real, even though this is a novel?
Naivety might be the reason why I did it. It's so funny because after I did it and it's taken and all of that and we're moving forward, I'm talking to some author friends and they're like, I never name the actual town, even if, it's so obvious which one it is. And I'm kind of like, you don't? Like, oh no, because people complain, but I hope I did Greenwich justice. I tried very hard not to stereotype Greenwich as, oh, it's just this posh, rich place full of estates and snooty people, which might be the stereotype of it. And I don't live in Greenwich, but I live close to Greenwich, so I do feel like I know Greenwich.
Sure.
And there are layers in Greenwich, probably in every town, of different places. And there's some very charming areas. Like Kate lives right near town in a cute little block with, you might have liked the Halloween, the candy to walking ratio for the kids, because they're little Victorian houses and they're historic society preserved. And then there's like a part of Greenwich that's very modern, and there's a really cool town with like the places that not everyone knows about. And I think Greenwich has a lot of layers. I would say I did look at some of my Amazon reviews, which I know you're never supposed to do, but one woman said that she really enjoyed going back to Greenwich where she grew up because she felt like it gave the details of Greenwich versus kind of just a basic stroke over what it's like there. So, yeah.
Right. No, I thought that was really well done too. And it's funny because it's another sort of element that lends itself to the relationship between Kate and Yvette, because they live in the same town but almost very different worlds. And I think at one part, Kate's even thinking about her entire house and how it could fit into Yvette's closet. And yet they have this, great relationship despite the fact that they're seemingly worlds apart. So there's so much context there that I love. And it can be difficult when you're writing a real place, because yes, people are going to be judging whether or not it's an accurate reflection. But I think that people, like you said, like that Amazon reader, people can really relate to it when it's something that they know, they grew up with, they saw. And as a Connecticut person, not really a Greenwich person, but it's nice to have that point of reference. And a general question for you I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that it took a while, to get this book published, something like a decade, maybe more. And you talk about that, in the acknowledgments too, that this is something that evolved over time. It was a gradual process. And I'm just wondering, for people who want it to happen quickly, what would you say to them, and what do you credit, with sticking with it? Because you stuck with it and now, you have this book to show. And some people just don't have the patience to do that. So speak to them for a moment, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I have a bunch of things that I would say to give them advice. I would say, don't give up. My story is that I sent 100, because I counted it, 163 queries out, and all rejections. I mean, some got closer, some were straight out rejections. Some were really like heartbreaking in that I got asked for a manuscript and I got asked to make some changes and then I got rejected. So I got a lot of rejections. And then I was with Tessa Weggert, who you know, who's we're part of the Tessa Weggert fan club.
Yes.
She's co-president with me of Sisters in Crime Connecticut, and she read the book. And I was literally at the point where I was going through Mystery Writers of America's publisher list and Googling which ones take submissions without an agent,
Right.
because I was ready to kind of go a different direction. And Tessa's like, no, you have to go to Pitch Fest. And Pitch Fest, for those who don't know it, it's another conference, international thriller writers, and it's like speed dating with agents. So you have like 3 minutes and you're like, hi, I'm Elise, my book is blah, 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 and this is what it's about. And long story short, for that part of it, I got my agent, Liza Fleissig, and a month later we had the deal with Thomas and Mercer. So
That's amazing.
it took forever and then it happened really quick. My other advice would be a couple of things. Join communities. Join Sisters in Crime Connecticut or Sisters in Crime wherever you are. Join Mystery Writers of America. Join thriller writers. And even just any kind of group that's informal if you want. Because the thriller writer community and crime writing in general is so supportive. So I would go to these conferences, and anyone will tell you this, and people would be like, what can I do to help you? And what can, join this, get this, do this. Here's a million suggestions. I barely knew Wendy Walker. I emailed her, can you write me a blurb? Of course, everyone is just really wants to lift you up. And that's because you don't just read one book. It's not my book or Tessa's book. It's, oh, I like this book. Maybe I'll also want to read this book.
Right.
It's not like when I was reporting for news and you're competing for time in 30 minutes, a 30-minute newscast. There's enough time for book lovers and book readers to read lots of books. And then everyone likes to say that thriller writers are so nice because they get all the meanness out on their pages. So, there's nothing left but nice. But I have found that, I'm sure you found, they're like just so nice and supportive.
Oh my gosh, the best.
Right. And then I would say you really have to be open to critique. And when you're taking critique from people, I think it's important to divide it into two categories. Someone says, oh, this sentence isn't working, or this plot isn't working. Why don't you try this? For so long, I would go to the, why don't you try this? And be like, no, that's stupid. But what they're really saying is, this isn't working. You, as someone closer to the manuscript, might have a better idea how to fix it. And I'm not telling you that my idea to fix it is the right one, but listen to me about that something's broken here. And I think too many times people don't hear this isn't working and they go right to the solution suggested.
Right.
So those are my suggestions. And really, I guess I'm saying the same thing, but really be open to working on your manuscript, because I don't think there's ever a bad manuscript. I think it's that a manuscript isn't ready.
Sure. I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I think giving constructive criticism, is a real skill. And I think receiving it is a real skill too.
I know,
like
right?
you said, you got to be open to it, because sometimes people know, what they're talking about. And it's funny you would mention, this community is the most supportive, friendly, outgoing bunch of people you would ever want to meet. And I think that people who are outside of the community are surprised by that. They think mystery thriller writers, they're all in competition with each other, and they're very, very dark people, and they're sticking knives into each other's backs. And I'm like, no, they're the ones who are pulling the knives out of everyone else's backs. It's, it's a great community. But you mentioned, Sisters in Crime, and there is a more recent chapter, Connecticut Sisters in Crime. And you can be a mister. You don't have to be a sister. If you were a guy, you are more than welcome to join. But like you said, you and Tessa are co-presidents. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more specifically about the great work that you're doing right here in Connecticut, because you guys are everywhere. I say guys, girls, but I mean, literally, you pop up
Thank you.
everywhere. You have a great social media presence, and it's kind of amazing right here in Connecticut to have that community. So if you wouldn't mind just speaking to that specifically for a few moments.
Yeah, sure. We're so excited about it. What happened was there was a Sisters in Crime. There is a Sisters in Crime Connecticut, Sisters in Crime tri-state, like New York and New England. And a lot of people in Connecticut, those organizations are amazing, but Connecticut itself is so big that while people found they could go to virtual events, it was hard to get to events in person. And you can be part of 3 Sisters in Crimes chapters. So it's not really taking away from anyone. So when National came and reached out to people who were in National and asked if there was any interest, Tessa and I was like, right after COVID, Tessa and I were on that first call, and we realized we lived one town apart, and we're like, let's go get coffee. And we kind of hit it off. It's like, you wouldn't believe we just met 2 years ago. It's like, she's my author bestie. She's amazing, as you know. And we really wanted to do this. And there were so many other people who wanted to get involved. We have 75 members now. And we just started like a year and a half ago. And I think the thing about Sisters in Crime Connecticut that I'm so proud of, I think more than anything, is that it feels like a very welcoming space for people. So we have write-ins, and we have a Halloween party, and we try to put on a lot of panels for our authors. Like for Library Week, we have a library liaison who organizes panels across Connecticut where our members can go and talk about their books and do different things. And we're doing a book fair. So, and you can be at any level, like with your books. We try to really spread the love that everyone, if you're self-published, can do that. And if you're a best-selling author, you can be on a panel. So we try to do that. And then, as Tessa did for me, we really, truly support authors who haven't found their path to publication yet, or are still working on their manuscript. And I mean, I'm proof to it actually happening with the support of Sisters in Crime. So it's a very nurturing, uplifting, nice, fun group of people, and everyone is well. And we do have not lots of guys, but we have some amazing guys. Greg Wands from E.J. Scott is in it, E.J. Scott, and Pompano, who's just like the nicest man in the world. He's our membership secretary, and a couple others whose names are escaping me. But yeah, we love our male siblings too.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It really seems to be like a big family, but a family of your choosing, which, is a nice distinction sometimes. And I always thought that, Tessa should be president, and now she is president,
Yes.
along with you, Sisters in Crime. So it happened in some capacity, which is outstanding. So just a few more questions for you, and then I will let you get back to your world of books. But I did want to ask you, now that you've sort of had a transition in careers, what fulfillment, are you getting through writing that you didn't get elsewhere? And what do you think, from your background, besides the obvious, lends itself, most well to now writing fiction, given the world that you existed in before this?
I really enjoy this world. I think it's a little bit more on my own terms. So when I was reporting, I was a little bit of a hamster on those spinny things.
That wheel, spinning wheel.
The wheel. And it was great. And I was young, and there was adrenaline, and it was fun. But, I didn't want to do it necessarily every day. And a lot of my reports were live. So that's a lot of pressure in front of all those people to be live on TV when I had a cold, or when, it was back in the day before COVID, where like unless you're in the hospital, you're going to work.
Right.
And a lot of the stories were really sad. I covered the Flight 800 crash for a month, and I covered the Long Island Railroad massacre trial of Colin Ferguson from beginning to end. And my mom used to say that like, because I'd be like, I'm really sad. She's like, your everyday is not normal. It's like someone is dying or a tragedy every day.
Right.
Which it's interesting. So now I'm writing murder mysteries, but I think I did that to process some of that trauma that I covered. Because I recently heard someone say they write murder to kind of get that out of them. And I knew why I covered why I wrote about a sports reporter. I want to go back into that world, but I think thinking about it recently, I'm also writing about the crime, because I did cover so much crime. Even as a sports reporter, I was the one, since I had a news background, who would cover like the Ray Carruth trial and the Ray Lewis trial, and so it's processing it, but it's on my terms. I try to write every day, but I write, I don't have to. I'm answering to a publisher a year from now, but I'm not like, okay, at 8 o'clock, you have to do this. And it's also, you're not doing the same thing every day. So you write for a certain amount of time, like say 6 months, and then I get to come out and do interviews and stuff like that. And I like doing this. Like, to me, this is really fun. And the social stuff is fun, and meeting other authors is fun. So it's not the same thing every day. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And I'm not, well, two other things, and I'm probably going on like blah, 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 blah. I hate wearing TV makeup, like hate. And Kate hates it. Like, I made Kate hate it. It's like just so gommed onto your face, and I can still feel it. And, I did put on some makeup for my interview with you, John, but it's not like gobs, and I don't have to wear it every day. Like, just not having to do that, I'm happy about. And, sitting in bed and typing, like it's nice, and then I can go to the recording places in my mind and all of that. Yeah, so it's a really nice balance. And I used to travel a lot. I would live places a month at a time. When I covered sports, I'd go to March Madness for a month. I'd go to spring training for a month.
Right.
And my family is really important to me. And I'm glad that now I can, when we get off, like go watch TV with my husband, or, go to
Right.
all my son's soccer games. Like, it's a better life balance
Sure.
to have this career.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the nice thing about fiction too, is we all know in real life you don't always get closure or justice or that happy ending. And at least in a book, you can, if that's the story you want to tell. And I think
Right.
too, for somebody like me, when the news gets to be too much, which seems all too frequent these days, I have the
Yeah.
luxury of being able to, turn off the TV, close the computer. And when you're reporting, the news, you don't have that choice, and you're just kind of consumed
Yeah.
in that world. And I can see how that would certainly wear on somebody. So final two questions, so you can get to television with your husband. And I don't know actually how much you'll have to add to this one, because you were already very generous, in giving advice to aspiring writers who might be tuning in right now. But everybody who comes on the show, I ask this question. So you can just let me know, if you have any other nuggets of wisdom to share that you didn't already. But I usually ask, what is the best advice in terms of a writing or creative life that you were ever given? And then the best advice that you were never given, nobody told you, but you found it out throughout the process of actually doing the work. So are there any other morsels you would like to share with people about that?
Wow. I guess I got this later in life, but find a writing friend. And if your writing friend is further along in the process, if you're unpublished and you can find somebody who's published, that would be so helpful. So that's what happened to me with Tessa at the very end. And it really made a big difference, because there's so much you don't know. And I must text or call Tessa, 10 times a day, even with little things now, how do I post my cover reveal, or what's, the proper thing to do in this situation, like over and over again. And then is there something I wish I knew that someone had told me? If I didn't have Tessa, that list would be like a mile long, but I really consider myself lucky because I have, a friend who's really walking me through this. So I think finding those people who are not just your peers, because a lot of times people are in writing groups with other people who aren't published yet, and you all kind of moan or groan about the same things. And I don't want to say moan or groan in a bad way, but it's nice to have someone to commiserate with. But it's also really important, like when people say, when you're playing tennis, always play with a tennis player who's better than you so you get better. It's very important to also bring people into your circle who are further along than you. And you'll be surprised at how generous they can be. You can reach out to me on my website if you want to talk to somebody, like, hey, I heard you, on Central Booking, come, I have questions. Like, that's fine. I'd love to, talk one-on-one, because it's meant the world for me to have that person.
Sure. And I was going to say, it's interesting because now, the roles sort of become the reversal. You've had that person and now you will be that person, for other people. And, Tessa, get ready for the influx. You've given such a great endorsement that everybody's going to want to be talking to you and Tessa, but who better? So final question to you. I wonder if you can leave us with a teaser as to what comes next, because you already said, we're going to see a lot more of Liam. So if you wouldn't mind, sort of setting up a bit of book 2 to keep us hanging, I would love that.
I am so excited about book 2. It's called Dangerous Play. It has a title. And like you say, I'm so immersed in my developmental edits right now for it. So it's like more in my mind. I think what's really cool about Dangerous Play is that it'll take you back into getting to know Kate a lot. So besides developing more of the Liam plot and also looking at Liam's history, because Kate's going to delve into that. The second book takes place at the Olympics, which takes place in New York. And Kate is assigned to cover soccer, women's soccer at Yankee Stadium. And someone is murdered that connects to her past. And one of the prime suspects is also someone who is from her soccer world. And then there are flashbacks, which I've never written before, and that was really fun to do, to Kate's time as a national youth player from when she was like 13 through 16. So you really learn more about Kate, and then you also, in the present sense, learn a lot about Liam, because Liam is involved in this investigation again, but you also investigate Liam a little bit. So with Kate, she's looking into Liam's past also.
Oh my gosh. And so now I'm thinking that sounds so good. And now I just have to wait and wait and wait. But, lucky readers, in the meantime, you have to run right out and get yourself Lights Out from Elise Hart Kipness. It's a fabulous book. Dare I call it a grand slam? It's like over the fence, across the parking lot. It's through somebody's windshield. Like, you might find the baseball in the car. I don't know. But Elise, thank you so much for being here. Best of luck with the book. It is an absolute page turner. Love sports or don't, you will love this book. You get it. You will not regret it. That's all I'll say.
Thanks, John. This was amazing. I really appreciate you having me on.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.